Move to Resolution 135. Senator Duenas, you're recognized.
Sidus Mahasi, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, malagod ta pega esti resolution prinaponi 135 given at rest na tinaita da malaguzo loki ta diskuti esti na prinaponi. Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to rise and request that I place Resolution 135 in the third reading file, and I'd like to discuss it.
Hearing no objection.
Mr. Speaker, Resolution 135 is basically an attempt to solve a long-standing issue that the people of Guam have had with regard to a bilateral agreement that was entered into over 2 decades ago between the federal government, United States government, and the Federated States of Micronesia. As the title reads, Mr. Speaker, the resolution is relative to requesting the introduction of legislation by Guam's delegate to Congress, appropriating funds for the annual budget of the Department of Interior as an additional payment to the government of Guam for unreimbursed compact impact costs for the cost of hosting the citizens of the freely associated states. Mr. Speaker, the resolution asks to do 4 things. First, the resolution asks to have the Congresswoman introduce legislation on an annual basis to reimburse Guam at the rate of $50 million a year for the next 10 years minimum to approach the outstanding debt of a minimum of $500 million owed to the people of Guam. And that number is actually quite a bit larger, Mr. Speaker, but this represents the 2001 to 2013 recognition of outstanding funds. The second, Mr. Speaker, is for Congress to finally realize a minimum true cost of $50 million annually, which is actually the true cost, and recognize that as the new appropriation to the people of Guam for hosting the FSM migrants to Guam. Mr. Speaker, the third thing that this resolution asks for is for this hearing, when this legislation is introduced, to actually take place on the island of Guam. Mr. Speaker, I think that is the least we could ask for. As you know, Mr. Speaker, we have seen a number of CODELs come through our island for a number of different reasons, build-up related, for veterans benefits, a number of different reasons to visit the island. And I think that the people of Guam deserve at least the respect and the recognition to have such a hearing here on the island. Mr. Speaker, this morning I was listening to the radio, and there was a discussion about a recent introduction that it may be a rider on the Budget Act, Defense Budget Act, I believe is what it was introduced with, this rider, to have the insular areas have their congressional delegate seat elected by plurality. Once again, at least I believe the first one to object was the delegate from American Samoa, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, one of the acting party chair for the Democratic Party was on the radio speaking in opposition. And I also did hear the good former Congressman Underwood call in as well on this issue. I describe this, Mr. Speaker, because this describes once again the type of situation that we face here, way out in the middle of the Pacific, decisions that affect our office, our delegate's office to Congress. Does it mean that it would change the possibility of who would be represented in Congress? An independent, a Republican, a Democrat. That doesn't matter. What matters is it's a key decision in our political process that obviously went forward, was introduced in a piece of legislation, and Mr. Speaker, we had no consultation. This was discovered. Something that would affect greatly our election for our delegate here in our territory. Mr. Speaker, recently, Senator Tony Ada, and Senator Roy Respicio were in Washington months ago. And they reinforced the issue that compact impact reimbursement should be one of the primary movers and reasons that support a recent resolution that was introduced, legislation that was introduced to pay war reparations to the people of Guam. Mr. Speaker, I remember our good Congresswoman coming before us, asking us to accept the issue of a place mark of the very important Section 30 funds to our budget on an annual basis in order to move forward on legislation for war reparations. I know that some of us in this body did so reluctantly and pointed out once again the fact that even this current president that we have, President Obama, included since 2008, then candidate, a recognition of the millions and millions of dollars owed to the people of Guam in past due compact impact funds. Mr. Speaker, during the public hearing on this resolution, a very well-spoken gentleman came and gave to this committee and this body a wealth of information, which I will not go over in this discussion this afternoon, Mr. Speaker. I know that members of this body were privileged to it. I just want to highlight at least one or two excerpts of what he pointed out. Mr. Speaker, this gentleman, Mr. Martinez, was then the director of GITA. And this was at the beginning of the original agreement of the Compact Impact. He was in Hawaii, and he had a good relationship with the governor at the time, Mr. Speaker. And they had started discussing this issue of Compact Impact. He discussed how in the beginning it was going to be a great thing, most especially for Hawaii, to develop their economy, because they needed, as the middle class was growing with their economy that was booming, they needed additional labor to help them. But they also capped it, Mr. Speaker, at 1% to ensure, as many knew and as studies would show later on, that a non-productive portion of migrants to the region, to that state, would then have an effect on their ability to cope with having to provide the services as per this agreement. Mr. Speaker, at the time, it was agreed upon, even with those who would be of financial benefit, Mr. Speaker, to the region and to all territories, that the calculation rate would be $4,000 per person. In those dollars, Mr. Speaker, with Guam's, at the time, estimated 4,000 migrants, that represented the $16 million that is currently being paid, and in today's dollars would be $80 million. And that wouldn't even be in today's dollars. That would be the calculated rate at the current estimated 20,000 that Guam is hosting our brothers and sisters from the FSM. And that would be in those days dollars. Imagine what that is today. Mr. Speaker, I was most impressed by the acting Consul General of the FSM and former Governor Rachel that came to testify during the hearing, and I come to that at this point to say the wonderful thing about the testimony that took place there and the interviews I had on the radio stations and others with regard to this resolution was, this is not an anti-FSM resolution. This is a pro-Guam resolution. This is a recognition. And even Governor Rachel, to me, had the most profound statement to say, we understand your quarrel is not with us. Your quarrel is on the basis of a completely underfunded agreement that you had no participation in. As a matter of fact, to recount once again Mr. Martinez's discussion, the governor of Hawaii at the time was surprised because they had already conducted 3 meetings with regard to this agreement, and Guam was not at the table. Mr. Speaker, I know that this resolution is not met with complete support. I know that our good Congresswoman has expressed reservations and caution. I, as much as everybody else, have the highest degree of recognition and respect for a Congresswoman, and always will, as a person and as an individual who has carried that office to great heights with regard to representing our island, Mr. Speaker. However, when concern is expressed over this resolution that I believe is very valid, and at the same time there is a recognition that a legislation with the insular areas and other areas is going to be introduced to include the state of Hawaii for $185 million, recognizing the true cost today for all of the jurisdictions hosting under the compact impact, gives me a little bit of pause, because I know also that that has not had a clearly identified funding source. And the caution and the concern is to introduce this legislation as respectfully requested in the resolution. The warning or the caution is that you have not identified the funding source. We have identified the funding source coming from the budget of the Department of Interior. Mr. Speaker, there also is another piece of legislation that has gone forward. I believe it's H.R. 2200, co-sponsored with Congressman Kalili of the CNMI and other jurisdictions within the insular areas, that calls for certain federal programs matching dollars to be offsets to past due compact impact, Mr. Speaker. I know that it had been mentioned in the past that even the discussions of past due compact impact could be considered a gimmick. Mr. Speaker, I say that when we're talking about matching, which if that's all we can get, moving forward, I would support. But to me, we're not asking for a handout. We're not asking for a hand up. We're asking for a past due. And Mr. Speaker, if all we can get is matching, that's fine. But to me, that's like asking for your lawnmower back when you already own it and it's been borrowed. Mr. Speaker, recently, it was in the Marist Variety that the good president from Palau, one of his key initiatives going to Washington recently was to request for the signing, just to have the document signed with regard to the compact agreement, because from what I understand, it is still unsigned, possibly because of lack of passage of a budget or whatever it is. Mr. Speaker, I believe that's in recognition, and once again, the understanding of the value to not only us, but our brothers and sisters in the FSM. Mr. Speaker, one of the documents provided to us yesterday by the same gentleman, Mr. Martinez, who represented in the public hearing with regard to Resolution 135, showed that for a 5-year period under the compact agreement, $1 billion was the appropriation. And of that $1 billion, for that segment of time, $201 million was for all of the affected jurisdictions combined, with the balance going, of course, to the FSM, which I'm glad. He even asked Governor Rachel, with all due respect, what's your secret? Mr. Speaker, there are many other things I think that could be said with regard to this discussion. I will close with 2 points that I believe to be true. I don't know how many more governors, how many more congresspeople, how many more senators with oversight, how many more directors, how many more speakers who travel to Washington, knock on doors, the due diligence of Bureau of Statistics and Plans, one of our members in this body, knows that this number is very conservative and knows how hard they work to compile the numbers, what formulas. I don't know what else it will take, Mr. Speaker, for the true cost and true compensation for all of the people of Guam, including our brothers and sisters, will realize when the true cost of offsets and the true cost is realized, so that we can give that money to our hospital, to our Department of Education, to Department of Corrections, to support our police department, to support our Department of Youth Affairs, which have already recognized these numbers. I don't know how many more people, Mr. Speaker, elected or otherwise, will go to Washington and knock on doors. And to be told, you need a new formula, when they already gave us the formula. Mr. Speaker, I know that even a good senator from Hawaii at the table breaking bread with the brothers and sisters from FSM had brought news to them even years ago that because they were experiencing economic difficulties at the time, they would be letting Washington know. There was going to be an ultimatum in terms of their ability to provide and continue to provide for those residents who could not provide them for themselves as a result of this agreement. I believe that the only two things we have left, one of which the governor himself in this very hall, Mr. Speaker, in the last address that he addressed to this legislature, alluded to very clearly that legal action could be pending with regard to this issue. But I believe, Mr. Speaker, that this is a responsible step for this body to take prior to that, to try to put this issue one more time on the table, and not just knocking on doors, falling on deaf ears, but legislation that could and should be debated and should draw the attention of all those jurisdictions like Hawaii, California, Arkansas, Washington State, who have all, on the federal level, expressed their concern as well. This is one of the few things that we have with regard to our representation, is to introduce legislation. So, Mr. Speaker, I close with the fact that the wording in this resolution says respectfully request. It doesn't say demand. It doesn't say stand up and beat on the table. It says respectfully request to use at least the one tool that we have. And the tool that already has been committed to in terms of 2 other occasions. Driving towards the same issue. That this be exercised, Mr. Speaker. And then, should legal action come, it is well deserved, Mr. Speaker. Once again, in closing, this is a pro-Guam initiative. It is a all of the people who live on Guam initiative to ensure that with the struggles that this government has to provide, and we're not doing so bad, Mr. Speaker, but the struggles that we have be met with all of those who have a party to it, to come to the table and provide, because right now we all know, Mr. Speaker, that the cupboards are bare. I thank all the current co-sponsors that I have on this resolution, and I hope that the rest of this body can join me in support for what I believe is a very important resolution stating the current plight that the people of Guam face with regard to this agreement that we had no part of. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. Senator McCready, did I understand your hand was up? Yes, okay, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise in full support of this resolution 135-32, and I commend the author for his leadership in taking a stance and respectfully asking to be reimbursed. You know, and I'm going to read something that we were lucky enough and fortunate enough to have in our meeting yesterday, just so everyone listening or watching can update themselves. In 1986, compacts of free association between the Federated States of Micronesia and the Republic of Marshall Islands, and later the Republic of Palau, and the United States of America created a new immigration status. That status was called habitual resident. And they were allowed citizens of these newly formed nations to enter the U.S. for purpose of education or employment without restrictions or any inhibitions by immigration authorities. These 3 new nations are collectively known as the Freely Associated States, or as we call it, FAS. Recognizing that this new status would probably create a physical burden on Guam, among other jurisdictions, the U.S. Congress made a commitment to reimburse the affected host jurisdiction for the costs that they incur in providing educational services and social welfare benefits to these habitual residents. Broadly constructed, the social welfare benefits include all of the public services other than education that the host jurisdiction were to provide. So would you like to say it was a great idea gone bad because now we're stuck being owed almost $600 million? I would say so. I just returned from Washington, D.C., and I had a meeting with U.S. Senator Brian Schatz from Hawaii. And all we talked about was the compact impact reimbursements. And he was a bit surprised when I told him that we were owed nearly $600 million. And I had expressed to him that how would we take care of not just our local citizens, but our FAS citizens, and let new ones in when we can't even take care of the ones we have now? Because without this reimbursement, with this nearly $600 million IOU, we can't take care of the people that we have on this island, to include the FAS citizens, whether it's the hospital or whether it's the DUI jails or the prisons. 70% right now of all DUI offenses are FAS citizens. So I do believe that the author of this bill is right with his passion and the willingness to take a first step on his part to try and get these monies paid back to us, or try and get a hold on the compact impact reimbursement issue that's been plaguing us for many years. I offered my 2 cents to the author a few weeks back, and I said, well, and I also explained this to the U.S. Senator, that maybe we should put a moratorium on anyone who comes in here until we figure out a way to take care of the people that are already here. Maybe we should mandate as a local branch of government, as a 32nd Guam Legislature, that any type of deportable crimes mandate that you must report to ICE. It's a first step, and I think it's more than a first step, it's almost a desperate step that we must take to not just improve our quality of life and the people that live on this island today, whether you're from the FAS or you're from Guam, but what happens if we don't take action now in 20 years from now? The problem is only going to get worse. And this $600 million in 20 years is probably going to double or triple in cost. So I asked the colleagues in the 32nd Guam Legislature to support this resolution, and I thank the author for allowing me to be on this resolution as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator McCready. Majority Leader, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to certainly commend the author of this resolution and every single one of his co-sponsors for wanting to do something to keep the issue of the compact impact reimbursements owed to the people of Guam on the front burner. I certainly want to recognize this collective effort to express to Congresswoman Berdalio that more needs to be done to get the United States government to own up to its moral obligation to reimbursing the people of Guam and the government of Guam for the impacts that their migrants have made to our health, education, and public safety. This resolution, Mr. Speaker, on the surface certainly is commendable. It keeps the issue alive. But what I rise to a concern is that the resolution tells the delegate, respectfully tells the delegate rather, to introduce a bill that would take money from the Department of Interior's budget to the tune of $50 million a year. And, you know, if we're just going to be pro-Guam, certainly that's something that I would rise to always support, never miss an opportunity to support. But we have to recognize that we have to be pro-Guam sometimes in the context of the federal bureaucracies, and to take money from the Department of Interior, which is tasked to oversee the insular areas, Mr. Speaker, is like kicking a hornet's nest and just wondering why we're getting stung. And if we want to remember in most recent time, where when Tony Babauta was the Assistant Secretary of the Interior, there was so much praise for everything that he's done while he was Assistant Secretary of the Interior. More grants to the University of Guam, to the Guam Community College, providing for buses and ambulances, and we hear of stories where Department of Interior has gone above and beyond to make these accommodations that the administration has to reprogram those compact impact funds. And so if the money was going to come from the U.S. Treasury, then certainly I would want to be just as aggressive, and has been just as aggressive as a sponsor and co-sponsor of this resolution, but to tell our delegate respectfully to introduce a bill and to have the offsets come from the very agency that oversees our island in terms of being a conduit to getting our issues resolved in the federal bureaucracy, I would be very cautious about that, Mr. Speaker, and be cautious in the sense that one hand, we recognize the Department of Interior for making these accommodations for Guam, for the government of Guam, for the governor of Guam, in those kinds of requests that he has. And if we want to preserve that kind of relationship, as we're hearing, we have that good relationship with the Department of Interior, particularly the division that oversees the insular areas. I think if we take a position as the people's representative to pass this resolution to now tell the Department of Interior, we're very grateful for all your flexibilities and accommodations over the years. Granted, more needs to be done in some areas, particularly in advocating for the compact impact reimbursements and the Medicare issue to Guam Memorial Hospital and other special areas that need more attention. We're basically telling them that we appreciate the relationship, but we want you to give up $50 million a year from your budget so we can move forward on making whole on the United States' obligation under the compact. And so I don't want to move to amend anything other than to rise in opposition to the resolution, only because of and if the Congresswoman does introduce a bill, which she said that it's her policy that whatever the legislature passes, that she will introduce the bill in the U.S. Congress. And if this bill does not go anywhere, the one unintended consequence, Mr. Speaker, that I'm pointing out is it would go a long way to jeopardizing the kind of relationship that we believe we have with the Department of Interior. And there are other initiatives on the front burner to keep this issue alive. When we heard from the Congresswoman's approach to paying for war reparations through H.R. 44 and how she indicated that that was just to be a placeholder for that appropriation, we moved very quickly as a legislature to ask her to identify the $600 million owed for compact impact to be used as an offset for the Medicare match, to also address issues of repatriation of those citizens who violate the compact and deport them to their place of where they came from. And so I just want to rise to respectfully register my objection to this resolution, and I ask us to really consider, and in this case, understand what we're asking for and to be careful what exactly is we're asking for. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Limtiaco? Any other senator wish to be heard after Senator Limtiaco?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You're recognized.
I certainly rise in support of the resolution, more so for the intent of the resolution than for any particular means to achieve it. I know our legislature in the past has tried several attempts to accomplish the same goal and had fallen short. You know, and if we go back to the actual resolution itself and we read the intent on page 2, where it identifies it's the intent of Eitc Legislature in Guam to propose a different approach to resolving the United States Congress's approach to appropriating a sum equal to the identified and verified unreimbursed costs of compact impact. And we just take that intent on its face value. I think what this resolution is attempting to do is, like the retiring speakers have pointed out, is just draw more attention to the fact that Guam has gone far too long to not be properly reimbursed for hosting our FAS citizens. And if we can just kind of expand that to the effect that it's having on this legislature and our government as a whole's ability to manage our finances, and we see the drain on our general fund resources, both on the hospital side, on the Department of Education side, to house our FAS brothers and sisters. It's definitely not for a shortage of not wanting to do it, but we can surely see the financial impact it's having on our government as a whole. We can see the impact it's having on our hospital, on our schools, on the current state and condition of our schools. And we really do need to ask our Congresswoman and respectfully request from her that we think of out-of-the-box solutions to help solve this problem. And if we just rewind back to our Congresswoman's war claim reimbursement strategy and the identifying of Section 30 funds as an earmark to help move war claims reimbursements or war claims payments to our citizens, surely we can find another out-of-the-box solution to solve our compact impact funding issues. What the author and the co-sponsors have requested in here is certainly a bold step, and we know that our Congresswoman has specifically identified that that what this resolution proposes will not satisfy House Republican rules. Well, let's work within those confines of those rules, Congresswoman Berdallo, and please, let's find an out-of-the-box solution to help solve this problem. It's certainly bold, but it's definitely as bold as our governor alluding to the fact that it may have to come down to a lawsuit in order to settle this. Hopefully we can avoid going to court in order to solve this problem. And if we just, as our Senator McCready had mentioned, work with our other insular areas to try and band together to help solve this problem, because we know that they're having the same issues, then certainly we can find a out-of-the-box solution to help address our compact impact reimbursements and our annual funding for it. I certainly rise in support of the resolution, and I ask my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator. Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Pangolinian.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, like the retiring speaker, I certainly rise more in support of the resolution, the intent, rather than the mechanics of what the resolution calls for. And I guess, you know, as I mentioned, and what has been mentioned on the floor is by my good retiring majority leader, is that, you know, this is in Washington, it really is about relationships. And if you want attention, you don't need the relationship. All you need to do is poke somebody in the eye and you'll get their attention. But how's he going to look at you and see you, and in what light is he going to see you when it comes time for him to make the decision? Because the ultimate decision is going to be those that are in charge in Washington. So if all we want is to get attention, then perhaps this is the way to get that attention. You poke the Department of Interior in the eye, who has the approval authority over your existing compact impact on how you can spend it and how you cannot spend it. And we've already seen how Washington has reacted in some case. They took over DC basically and put a board of control to run the city government of DC when they didn't like how DC was handling its authorities as a local city government chartered by Congress itself. So they just said, we don't like what you're doing, we don't like your response to it, we don't like how you're handling it, we're going to put a board of control. And they put a board of control, which really wiped out the mayor's powers over the city and put in a federally appointed receiver almost for the entire city government. That got DC's attention, but what did it get them in the end? Nothing, really. The other issue that you can take a look at is, you know, as the good retiring speaker said, that how do you work with other entities perhaps outside of the box? Well, there's already a bill that has been introduced by Senator Hirono of Hawaii, and I think it's Patsy Mink and Tulsi Gabriel from DC, from Hawaii, that they have introduced legislation to increase the funding for compact impact. So in that respect, what we're asking them to do, we're asking them to do something specific, our own congresswoman to do something specific for Guam, but she has teamed up with the other federal representatives, in this case the state of Hawaii, and have said, let's increase it because it's not enough. So we have already achieved in that respect of having legislation introduced that would increase compact impact. And I think that that's going to get further along than just having our Congresswoman introduce a bill all by herself to take money out of the Department of Interior budget, we don't know where, and say, we're going to take your appropriation and put it towards Guam itself. How do you think the other representatives now feel? Are they now going to say, well, since you have your own solution now, Congresswoman, since you want to take $50 million out of the Department of Interior, we're just going to take you out of our bill? Because that would be less money for us to have to identify and work within the rules of the Republican House. Is that going to be the result of this? Would that be something that could occur? We don't know. But it would certainly give me a pause when we've come together, we identified the problem common to our jurisdiction, we identified a common solution, and we said we're all going to throw our efforts behind this one solution, which is exactly the same. Identify more money for compact impact. And do we have a better chance of having 4 or 5 representatives with voting power on the floor working with us on that solution versus having our Congresswoman now abandon all those other colleagues and saying, oh, I'll work with you there, but I want my own for my own territory, you know, and just move and maybe I can get mine, and if you don't get yours, then too bad. Or if we all got it, then, you know, or if I can't get mine, but I got it through you, then it's great. I mean, it's just, that's not the kind of working relationship that breeds success in Washington, D.C., or anywhere for that matter. So I am concerned about what the effect this resolution would have, and if really we want a bill introduced. If we just want attention to poke the Congresswoman in the eye, then okay. I just don't feel like poking her in the eye. I just don't think that's the way to get things done. We've been working with the Congresswoman for many years on the reimbursement of compact impact funds. And, you know, that was a conversation Senator Frank Blas and I had many, many times in this legislative hall. What do we do? And you know, I told Senator Blas, I said, the solution is, or what we have to do is think outside the box. How do we figure out a way to tap into that recognized from the local government side, getting greater recognition on the federal side that there is a portion of compact impact costs to the territories and the states that are unreimbursed, and that we track that as a liability. And I said the way we use that is we try to get it so that we can use that unreimbursed compact impact portion for federal matching grants in lieu of local matching dollars through our appropriations in the budget, so that if we get additional money for Medicare, rather than appropriating 45% of the money to get the 55% in Medicare benefits, that we would use the chits basically that we have, the credit that we have under unreimbursed compact impact, and say we're going to take that 45%, give us the 55, and we don't have to come up with the cash. You know, and so we get 55% for Medicare, and we get additional money here without having to put up the cash. And you know, I worked with the Congresswoman that over the years, and that's what I had suggested to Senator Blas, of course, and he picked up that, and he continued to work with it. I continued to work with the Congresswoman, which resulted in now we have a bill that would allow us to use unreimbursed compact impact to match the Medicare, and we have about $258 million in increase in Medicare, Medicaid matching funds between now and 2018. And if we can use 100 million or 110 million of that to match and get that money, we don't have to come up with the cash. We get to pay for medical services for our people and have that additional extra money available to us. So things are happening. They're working. We have legislation in place. As I said, the Hawaii delegation and our Congresswoman and the other delegates from the territories have introduced a bill that would increase it. But this of now trying to separate ourselves from the collective efforts of those jurisdictions that are affected by compact impact migration, I don't know that that is for me a smart thing to do at this point. I think we need to stick with those that are stuck with us in trying to work and have the power of the vote on the floor to help us resolve this problem. And to go off on our own, to take it out of the Department of Interior, where we don't, I mean, I'd probably feel more comfortable if there was a little bit more due diligence and said, from the revenues of the mining leases on national park lands, $50 million. So we kind of, you know, not just poke the Department of Interior or the eye, but truly do what the House Republican caucus leadership has placed upon each member of Congress, is that you identify from which revenue stream or which offset, so that you say, for example, increase drilling permits on federal parks, national parks, for oil leases, increase them by $50 million and give that money to Guam. I would feel a little bit more comfortable if we did something like that, because that comes out of the Department of Interior. But to just grab it out of their pocket without knowing which of their programs you're going to hit with this and what priorities they're going to be giving up, just doesn't meet the intent. The intent was you forego something or increase something to get the resources you need to fund what you want to fund in the proposal you're placing before the House. And this doesn't do that. It wouldn't do that. It would just say cut Department of Interior's budget. And I don't know that, you know, how would we react when somebody comes in here and they say, you know, we want something and just cut the legislature's budget. I mean, some of us will be happy, but some of us will say, well, where do you want me to cut it? But it's got to have a little bit more detail and more thought if that's the direction we want to go. But again, repeat myself one more time and then I'll quit, is that it is the relationships that exist in Washington and the relationship that our Congresswoman has forged with the state delegation of Hawaii, both on the House and Senate side, and the other territorial delegates, to achieve what is being asked for in this bill, which is the increase of the funding for Compact Impact that would benefit the other states as well who are impacted, that we have put our efforts in that. Our Congresswoman is working with them, and to not abandon that effort, but to put her own effort forward while leaving the others behind in her own effort, I think is not the way to go, and I don't want to put her in that position at this time. Thank you, and Sidusmase.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Argan?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to start this. You know, Mr. Speaker, I stand up here and I'm standing here and I've listened to a good number of the comments and the justification behind the introduction of this resolution. If you look at and you listen at the core of the presentation, we all share that concern as members of this body. And that is that we are under reimbursed based on the agreement that was consummated by the United States government and the Federated States of Micronesia government leaders back in 1986/1987. And part of that agreement said if there's any in-migration of FSM citizens to Guam or to any of the other territories, then we would be rightfully reimbursed for the costs incurred. And you know, Mr. Speaker, I recall back in 1997 when I first entered this hallway, Guam at that time, if I'm not mistaken, was receiving a reimbursement at the level of $4.8 million. Then over the years, the state of Hawaii also began knocking on this particular issue. And the overall allocation increased to $30 million, which was divvied up between Guam, CNMI, as well as the state of Hawaii. And our figure was adjusted upward to reflect $16.2 million, which is what the government of Guam presently gets as reimbursement. So based on the reports of the cost incurred of $100+ million and Guam receiving $16.2 million on an annual basis, Mr. Speaker, the numbers just don't add up. Who is bearing the additional cost of providing accommodations and support to our brothers and sisters from the FSN, Federated States of Micronesia. At this time, that gap is being filled and being incurred by the people of Guam, the taxpayers of Guam. And I have to admit that many of these individuals who originated from the outer islands, from FSM islands, have come to Guam and have been very productive citizens or residents of our community. And we cannot disregard that, because many of them are active not only in sports, many of them are active in the education arena, many of them are active in the private sector. They're contributing back to the community. But in the same token, Mr. Speaker, what this resolution asks is what was documented in that Compact Impact Agreement. Reimburse the community of Guam the amount that is rightfully due to this community, which the people of Guam, the taxpayers of Guam, have borne since 1987. But you know, Mr. Speaker, I look at that and I say, yes, the people of Guam are bearing this cost. And the previous speaker had alluded to some of the activities that are taking place now that are indirectly contributing directly towards the reimbursement process. The reservation I have, because there's tremendous merit behind the concept that underlies this particular resolution. We need to get reimbursed so that we can take care as a community as a whole, inclusive of the immigration or the individuals from FSM who have made Guam their home, inclusive of accommodating them with the best education possible, with the best healthcare services possible, with the best public safety services by this government, and the best infrastructure. That's why we're asking for the reimbursement. But it goes back, Mr. Speaker, to the provision that links it directly to the Department of Interior. That's where I have my reservation. Because certainly there are different ways to knock at the door, or there are different ways to communicate the requirement, whether it be through the legal process to the courts, which we know that the chief executive had alluded to possibly taking that route, or continuing to pound at the door through the assistance and the intervention of our Congresswoman and see if we can get some additional remedies or some additional support or some additional reimbursements as a result of this agreement. But it's how it's presented to require, based on, it's a request to the Congresswoman that she introduce legislation that will require the Department of Interior, that has somewhat quasi-oversight responsibilities of all the U.S. Commonwealths and territories, that in fact, the additional payment for the unreimbursed compact impact funds originate from their budget, that department's budget. That's where my reservations seriously come in. Because if we're going to expect that the Department of Interior officials to continue to advocate for the issues to some extent, whether it be compact impact, whether it be other services, other requirements, we certainly need to work with them. And that's where my concern comes in, Mr. Speaker. Because we definitely need to continue to push and advocate for the primary concept behind this resolution, is that the people of Guam continue to get the short end of the stick when it comes to that agreement, and we need to get that additional unreimbursed funding given to the community of Guam. Otherwise, indefinitely into the future, it's going to be the taxpayers of Guam that will continue to bear the burden of all of these additional costs. So, Mr. Speaker, following expressing my reservation, obviously, I support the intent. I have a reservation in regards to how this resolution would try to get that message across. Hard-hitting, though. I have to admit, it's an extremely hard-hitting approach, and sometimes in life you get one hit and that's it, or one chance and that's it. And I certainly hope that some of our colleagues would consider the implications, at least from my perspective, of what this may have in terms of the relationship that some of our government officials on Guam and our Congresswoman presently has with the Department of Interior officials as well as the executive branch and then as well as her colleagues. And be mindful also that this resolution, should it extract resources from the Department of Interior, it could have implications where some of those resources, if in fact it's hypothetically or realistically carried out, it could have implications in terms of extracting some finances or resources that are otherwise going to the Federated States of Micronesia. So I support the idea. I commend the sponsors of this resolution. I don't like the route that it is proposing in terms of trying to extract some funding out of the Department of Interior's budget. So I express my serious reservations in regards to this resolution. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Nicholas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have mixed feelings about this resolution, actually. I kind of like it. I like the idea that we're probably going to start putting our foot down and start stomping a little bit for the money that we're supposed to be getting from the federal government as per the agreements that they made on our behalf without our consent or approval. $550 million is not a small amount of money, Mr. Speaker. And it's just one piece of the taxation without representation that we have to endure on a regular basis due to our political status and the nature of our relationship with the United States. 515 Compact Impact, we're stuck with EITC payments. That's a mandate in the Congress on a tax code that we have no say in the development of. So we have to pay out EITC. We have the needs of upgrading our wastewater facilities on primary and secondary treatment because of EPA requirements, but we're not able to get the federal money that we need in order to comply with those federal requirements. Those are standards that are being set by the federal government and they're being put onto us to manage. And the argument is, oh, you keep all of your federal taxes on Guam. Well, yeah, but also your standards that you set for us may not be aligned with the amount of tax revenue that we generate. And then 2 times, Mr. Speaker, not once but twice, the buildup that all of us are anticipating and looking forward to, the buildup money has gotten blocked in the Senate. They turn around and they say, oh, we're not going to give you that money until you have a master plan. But we're not the ones who are supposed to put together that master plan. Is the Department of Defense is supposed to put together that master plan. In the meantime, that money that's supposed to come in to get us ready for that buildup, because it's going to take time, is getting held up in the Senate. We're constantly being shuffled around on the political chessboard as a pawn in the greater scheme of federal politics. And if we have to get a little more firm and say, hey, we know what we're entitled to, and we're going to start compelling even our own delegate to go out there and make those requests on our behalf, then maybe it's time we started doing that, Mr. Speaker. Because I do agree with a lot of the other statements that were made that we need to be mindful of our relationships and we don't want to offend this or turn off that. But man, Mr. Speaker, at what point is it going to be about what we think? And part of my thought process is if the Department of Defense is not going to be able to come through because the Senate's blocking it, then let's go knock on the Interior's door. And let's go let all of these different federal agencies, all of these different entities in the federal government know that if you're not going to come through on this side, we're not going to just let you off scot-free on this other side either. It's very delicate in how we handle these things because we want to make sure that we're not closing off any other opportunities that are out there for the island and our people. We want to make sure that we're not conveying the wrong message. We don't want to look unpatriotic because we are, and we demonstrate it in the loss of life of our own people. We don't want to make it look like we don't want the build-up because I don't think there's any senator here who doesn't want it in some fashion or another in order to benefit our communities. But what we do want, what must be made clear, is that we want the respect. We want the respect and the acknowledgement that we understand what is owed to us, and somebody's got to eventually come through on that. And just because we don't have a senator, a voting senator, even a non-voting senator, and just because our delegate in Congress cannot vote, doesn't mean that we should be part of this gaming system where senators such as Senator McCain or Senator Levin block off funding to Guam to make a statement. I'm tired of our people and our island being used to be made an example of. So yeah, perhaps this might irritate the interior. But sometimes the mosquito bite is the one that gets scratched. And I think that it's important for us as a people also to be able to have enough courage to go out there and say, you know, this is what you owe us. And if we're not going to get it here, then we're going to come over here and we're going to ask for it. And we're going to start tightening up the issue until somewhere, somehow it's going to come through. So I have mixed feelings about this resolution because I do agree with, you know, the need to always be mindful of how we're making other entities feel. But when are we going to get people sitting on our side of the table and saying, yeah, you know what, we owe you $550 million and we're going to do what we can on our side. And yeah, if you need to go through our budget to do it, then why don't you go ahead and introduce something and we'll use our leverage on our side to try and negotiate it. I mean, that's what I'm thinking should be the reaction. The Interior should be saying, yeah, you know, we owe you that. Why don't you go ahead and have somebody ask for it to come through our budget and we'll fight for it. But no, instead we're saying, let's not do that because we don't want Interior to get mad. And in the meantime, our people are short $550 million. So I'll continue to listen to discussion on this resolution, Mr. Speaker. But I do appreciate the intention of the author, and I will give it a lot of consideration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Senator Yamashita. Any other senator after Senator Yamashita? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me the opportunity to speak on Resolution 135-32. Mr. Speaker, I do believe that everybody understands that as we have played hostess to our brothers and sisters, that the impact on our hospital, our health system, our education system, our safety system, our penitentiary, all around we have endured some consequences. And I want to say right now, at the same time, as they have joined our neighborhoods and our community, we have also learned a lot from them. And they have been blessings. The Compact Impact residents, citizens have been welcomed and have become a part of us in a variety of ways. And it is indeed true that, however, the amounts of money needed to develop the kind of infrastructure to adequately house them, school them, discipline them, ensure safety surrounds them is inadequate. And so we are here one more time saying we need this kind of money to make sure that everybody is safe and that everybody carries their own weight and that everybody can proceed with a high quality standard of life. I am one to always say that one size doesn't fit all, and I am one to always say let's look at other possible ways. And so what is being proffered by this author is another way. This is what I ask, though, after listening to our colleagues, is I think what we want to do is to really define what the Department of Interior has actually provided for us. I know that they've bought buses. I know that they've bought fire trucks. I know that they've provided grant opportunities at the University of Guam, maybe Guam Community College, but I don't know the whole picture, Mr. Speaker. And so I need to do some homework on my own. What have they offered? What does that amount of money look like? And then what are their plans for the upcoming year? And are those investments going towards helping with that quality of life for all citizens, to include us? So it's the whole picture part that I want to look at. And again, I will do my homework. I also suggest that we really do have to be smart and strategic. And I think we're trying to be strategic here. But now I ask that we be really smart and be careful about what we are asking for. If you read today, there was there was reactions from the Virgin Islands and American Samoa, because there are a couple of senators, I think perhaps they were two of our favorites these days, who have moved to change the voting requirements for our congresswomen and their Congress delegates. I believe it is from the majority to the plurality. And they're trying to change the rules, and there's anger from the delegates because nobody asked us. So I think we need to be mindful of the relationships, the roles, the responsibilities, and the positions, and face up to the reality that we are in a particular position. It doesn't mean we're not courageous and bold. It doesn't mean that at all. I think Guam all along has been very courageous in saying, yes, we will do this, but first we want to do this. Yes, we welcome you, but first we need to ensure that you help us get to this certain standard. I don't believe we've ever laid down and say, please roll over us. But the fact of the matter is we are in a position, in a political situation, where we need to be very, very smart and strategic. So I too support the notion that we're saying we need what was coming to us, what should have been coming to us, what is ours, to help the citizens of the freely associated states be comfortable here and to be a very good part of our island and to hold hands so that we can move forward. But before that, I will certainly go back and do some more homework about what DOI has in plans, what they have contributed, and how that has actually impacted the different aspects of the quality of life on our island. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Yamashita. Any other senator wish to be heard? If not, I will invite the sponsor to close.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I must start by saying, first of all, I appreciate all the comments. I'm a little surprised, and I will start with this. Mr. Speaker, it has been touted a number of different times that this body, many members currently, many members from the 31st, the current governor, the current lieutenant governor, passed 2 resolutions in this House. One Guam. War reparations. Compact impact. EITC. FINA. The list goes on and on. One Guam. We were told once again, and I'll just put the reminder out. We were told, just like a good book that came to Guam years ago so we can teach our children, play by the rules. The rules of the House are, you must identify a funding source. To the extent, once again, and I have to emphasize this, in my slight surprise from some of the comments, but I appreciate it nonetheless. You must follow the rules, even to the extent of Section 30. It's not going to be taken out. It's just a place mark, like what you put your cup on top of. You're not going to lose that money. Follow the rules. Identified the Department of Interior, Mr. Speaker, to follow the rules. I don't think that I have to express to the members of this body what the Department of Interior means to Guam. That's the gatekeeper for the insular areas. Poking in the eye. I'm not even going to go over what I wrote down. I think it would be unconstructive at this time. This is not a poke in the eye, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, during the discussion, one member came over. Why don't you just include it in the 185? There's nothing in this resolution that says you have to stand up on the top of the mountain and yell $50 million for Guam and bring us current due. It says respectfully request. It says, Mr. Speaker, if you introduce a bill, it's to be debated. All the discussions on what couldn't happen, by the way, this represents 0.0333% of the multi-billion-dollar interior budget. It's on the website. And this body of anybody, understanding the legislative process, and I thank the good senator from Talafofu by way of Central Guam to Northern Guam, living in Dedido, for his astute comments, and I thank him. Because I think that is the recognition, not to poke in anybody's eye or anything. It's just how many times, what do we do? And besides following the rules, and besides identifying Department of Interior, because we all know that is the door, the gatekeeper for the insular areas. It's not like I went to Department of Agriculture or somewhere else. Mr. Speaker, following the rules, went to Department of Interior. I understand relationships. I think everybody in this room understands relationships. We've been talking about that, but we also understood when we adopted those two resolutions, it was an embracing as well. There were things in there that raised the hair on the back of certain individuals in our community's neck. But it was putting on the record, just like the civilian military task force did, identifying the billions of dollars for the buildup, which was just and right. Nobody argued that. There are no timelines that are identified in this resolution, Mr. Speaker, as to what the resolution means when it's delivered to Washington, if it makes it there. It's a representation of what Guam is asking for. I know our Congresswoman has great relationships. I know that the jurisdictions that my good colleague, Senator Yamashita, identified and I opened with in terms of the once again disrespect of something that affects our jurisdiction that was introduced, that bothered the other Congresswoman first. And Guam was recognized. So I know those relationships, and I agree with those relationships. And I'm not saying this $50 million can't be part of the 185 that's been requested, that to date, I didn't see following the rules on that one. Because I didn't see. any identified, and maybe that's the reason. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll end with just to put a little or in there, and I don't know, maybe it will help, maybe it won't. But on page 1, Mr. Speaker, on line 6, after Department of Interior, I would like to insert the words or U.S. Treasury. And on page 2, on line 15, the Department of the Interior, after the or the U.S. Treasury, well, so that perhaps it'll be general then, in terms of there will be options there. So I offer those amendments at this point, Mr. Speaker.
On the amendment, any senator wish to be heard? Senator Respicio.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on his first amendment on page 1, line 6, I don't think we would want to insert the word U.S. Treasury because this is saying that the Department of Interior will submit the information in a format following each successive federal government requirement for seeking reimbursement. So this is the responsibility of the Department of Interior. So I would rise to that objection in the first amendment. And on the second amendment, I don't know if you're going to bifurcate this or take it all at one time, but I also would like to amend his amendment to just simply take out the requirement that this bill appropriate the monies from the Department of Interior budget and just say U.S. Treasury.
All right. On the first amendment, is there any objection to? So no objection to the First Amendment? No, I mean your correction of the First Amendment. So you'll withdraw the First Amendment?
Mr. Speaker, I do withdraw the First Amendment. That sounds like an excellent idea.
Okay, and on the Second Amendment, where you were including Department of the Treasury, U.S. Treasury, do I understand that, Senator Respicio, you're amending that to drop Department of Interior and just say U.S.
Yeah,
Treasury?
so Mr. Speaker, the amendment will delete the words annual operating budget of the Department of Interior, and it'll just incorporate the mover's amendment where he says that U.S. Treasury shall be taken from the United States Treasury.
On the amendment by Senator Respicio, any senator wish to be heard on that? Senator Duenas, is there an objection to Senator Respicio's second amendment?
Not at all, Mr. Speaker. I think that's an outstanding amendment.
So then we go back, and there is no amendment on the floor now, right?
There are no amendments on the floor anymore, I don't believe, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank everyone in this body. I really, really do. I think it was an excellent deliberation, and I request that it be sent down to the third reading for consideration by the body, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Any objection? Hearing none. Where is the speaker? Do you want to do 100 now, or should we do the pars? Okay. All right. We're on Bill 100. Madam Speaker, you're recognized.
Actually, Bill 100 was, we had stopped and recessed because of an amendment that Speaker Pangolinian was going to proffer, and I think everybody's received that, so that's where we left off. So then it will be Speaker Ben who will be recognized.
I stand corrected. Speaker Pangolinian.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Uh, Mr. Speaker, when I was recognized to speak on Bill 100, I wanted to, of course, support the intent of Bill 100 and wanted to present some amendments to the bill itself. As you know, Mr. Speaker, even though I have some concerns and some reservations, but I certainly support wholeheartedly the Speaker's or the author's intention in the bill and what she had placed in there, which was that when the government of Guam cuts a refund check to an individual, the flow of the funds is that it goes into the income tax efficiency payment trust account. When they make the deposits, money goes into that account, it stays in that account, it's an interest-bearing account, and so if the laws are followed and the deposits are made between October 1st of the fiscal year and September 31st of that ending year, money would be deposited every single month. And every single month in which there are unpaid income tax refunds, money would then be moved out of this income tax efficiency trust account and put into the income tax reserve account, which is the checking account basically for those income tax refund payments. So the checks are drawn against that special account of the income tax reserve account. The money to pay is deposited initially into the trust account, and then that trust account generates interest. And then the interest from that trust account, from the deposits made every single month, and it would be $100 million throughout the year, would result in some additional interest income in that account, and that money, the interest income itself, would be available to the Department of Revenue and Taxation to help with what is needed to process income tax refund checks or process the returns, identify the problem returns, contact individuals. So the theory was that, and the practice really is that money would be deposited in the account, interest income is retained by Rev and Tax, used to supplement their budget so that they can process the returns faster and basically have the refunds ready to be paid out of the trust of the reserve account. Because we saw in this last 4 or 5 years a large amount of borrowing to pay past due refunds, what we saw was that it brought attention to money that is sent out to taxpayers who are owed refunds, and then they get returned to the government of Guam because the refund checks, or that person is either left island, the person died, for whatever reason, the money, income tax refund return is not cashed by the individual for whatever reason and returned to the government of Guam. And our statute says that you have 3 years to come back and reclaim your refund to get a new check issued to you if you should find during these 3 years that, hey, what happened to my refund? Or else you call. And this has become a little bit more highlighted, like I said, because we borrowed the money to pay it and we have the money. Before, when we didn't have the money, you just waited and waited and waited, and you may not even know that you had a check mailed to you and it got returned to the government of Guam. And so what has occurred is that there's a larger amount of money that is cheating to the government of Guam, and the majority of that money is the 2009 refund bonds, where we send out $112 million. Actually, no, I'm sorry, the $260 million that we borrowed. We borrowed $109 million in 2007, and we paid $112, and some of that money already is cheated to the government of Guam. So people who were owed refunds from the 2007 bonds that were paid out and never cashed the refund checks or never knew they had one sent to them because they're off island or whatever, that money has already come back to the treasury of the government of Guam. We're spending it again. So 2009, 260 million, I've started tracking how much money has been uncashed, can I get a reconciliation of the checks and so forth. And so I've been bugging Reverend Tax and the Department of Administration to identify those people. Who has, because they said when they mailed out all those checks, if you recall, they had $13 million of refund checks that were returned to the government of Guam and haven't been claimed. Now, because we continue to follow up with the Department of Administration, we wrote to the to Reverend Tax and saying, figure out a way to contact these taxpayers. It's not fair that you're sitting on that money, $13 million in the bank account, people haven't gotten their money, and you're not making any attempt to contact them. The response I got from Reverend Tax, which of course we knew was not accurate at that time, was, oh, there's a privacy issue. And don't worry about it, because once we cut that check, it belongs to them, and we're not going to release another check, and they'll always have that money there. Well, of course, that's not entirely accurate. Number one, there's no privacy issue, I think. We found out, and we informed the Department of Revenue and Taxes, what do you mean you can't contact these people, or you can't publish it? The Department of Treasury and the U.S. Virgin Islands, which has a mirror image codes with the United States, just like we do with the IRS code, they have a website in which you can click and see if you have a refund check that's unclaimed waiting for you. And there, you know, and so you can't tell me there's a privacy issue, because that's the same tax code that applies to us, that applies to the Virgin Islands, and they have a drop-down menu on their Treasury webpage that says refund checks, and you can actually find and go in there and you'll find out who has an outstanding refund check. And so we again said, you can't do that. You got to figure out a way to contact these individuals. $13 million, it's unfair to these individuals who are off island. I was getting calls from some people off island. Hey, Senator, hey, do I have a check? Because, you know, I haven't been paid for 2009, 2010, and I don't know what happened to it. I got one phone call that said, I got 2 checks, I'm due a third one, and they told me I don't have any. Well, lo and behold, I asked the Department of Revenue and Taxes, DOA, I said, give me the list of the checks that are escheated under Bill 100 and under our escheat statute of 3 years. Who is owed this money? And so I got a list. I got a list for 2009, 2008, and 2010. Hey, I got a staff member who's owed a check. I got a staff member who's owed a check in 2008 and 2009. I found out our good friend living in, former attorney living in Guam, he's got 2 checks, $8,000, $4,000 for 2008, 2009. Never got his check because he had moved off island, and Rev Tax never forwarded the check to him. This is the money now that under a statute is going to go back to the government of Guam forever. The guy is owed money, legitimate, yet he's not going to be able to come back and claim that check because 3 years has lapsed. It's not his fault. It's the failure of this government to reach out to these people and inform them that you've got a check and come and get it. Mr. Speaker, we got checks owed to PBS internally within the government of Guam. There's a check for $30,000 made out to KGTF that is just cheating to the government. I mean, it's just, and they're saying, so we know that we're going to spend that money once more. We're going to spend it twice. So when the Speaker introduced this bill, the good author, saying, for the refund side, we should not take that money out of the refund account and pay any other obligation of the government. We should keep it in there and continue to pay refunds, either past due or current, until we are current on our refunds. We should not take that money and spend it for any other purpose than what it was originally put in there, and that is it was put in that trust account so that when we are ready to pay refunds, it goes into the payment at the checking account and the checks are distributed. So that's why I support the intent of Bill 100. However, Bill 100, I think the part that I have, that I would like to consider is that now Bill 100, if I read it correctly, would even reduce the escheatment time from 3 years to 1 year. And so what I would like to to kind of present to the body, Mr. Speaker, is an amendment that would allow the government of Guam to give an opportunity to a taxpayer who is owed a refund the same amount of time to come back and claim that refund as we have when we are going after a taxpayer for taxes owed. If you recall, we've had discussions where you can go back 10 years to assess the refunds and collect past due income taxes. We just have the bill that proposed now to set it so that when you owe the government GRT, that rather than 7 years, we're going to have 10 years to go after you to collect that money. Well, I think that a taxpayer who, through no fault of his own, or even if he's just a little bit, maybe he didn't need the money today or tomorrow, but finds out he's really tight a year from now or 4 years from now, and he said, that refund check I never got, I'm going to go claim that and ask the government. Lo and behold, under our current statute, if it's older than 3 years, he can't claim that check. I think he should have the same amount of time. He should have 10 years to come back and ask for his refund, just the same way the government has 10 years to come after you and get you to pay a past due obligation. And so the amendment I'm offering, Mr. Speaker, is to add a new under Section 2 of the bill. It would be under Section D, it would be the amounts of all checks or drafts which shall be unclaimed or outstanding for more than 3 years from the date of the audit shall be paid into the Treasury as revenue to the general fund, with the exception of. So the 3 years cheatment statutes will remain for other checks that the government has written that has remained unclaimed, with the exception of any and all refund checks which shall have been unclaimed or outstanding for more than 9 years from the date of the audit shall be deposited and remain with the income tax reserve fund established pursuant to Chapter 50 of 11 GCA and shall be expended in accordance with 50105 of 11 GCA. And that really gives you that 10 years, because the way the statute is written is that all of these refund checks shall be kept in a separate check register and audited by the government of Guam before when it is cheating, and at the end of every fiscal year. So you have 1 year where these checks remain unclaimed, they're put on this register, and then 9 years after that, after the end of the fiscal year, to come back, for the taxpayer to come back when he finds out, and then he can claim that for that's a total or a 10-year period. So that's the amendment that I'm offering, one of the amendments that I'm offering in the bill, and the other amendment.
Let's take this one first, please.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I'm not sure how that's going to be responded to, so I just... On the Pangolinian amendment to change the statute of limitations to 10 years, Madam Speaker, any other senator wish to be heard on the amendment? None.
Yes.
Plus the 9.
Mr. Speaker, was that if you look at the bill, it's not substituted. So what I had filed was really it's 4 years, not from 3. I'm not bringing it down from 3 to 1. It's actually 3, but it becomes 4 because of that 1 year in which it is unclaimed. Then it's held for the additional 3 years, very similar to what was 9 years for it to be unclaimed, plus the extra year gives it the 10 years. So that basically, what it does is that it's these that are unclaimed. If you look at the original unsubstituted bill, is that any and all tax refund checks which shall have been unclaimed or outstanding for more than 3 years from the date of the audit shall be deposited into the income tax refund reserve fund. And I understand, of course, where the mover of this amendment, is going with the now 10 years versus the 9 years. And you know, I mean, by the time we even do anything and put monies, income tax return monies into this reserve fund, we really won't even realize, you know, any money is actually going out to the taxpayers. And I mean, we're just, to me, it's just that, you know, we're going from now 4 to 10 years, and I just think that that's just too long. I mean, you know, just today we talked about a bill earlier that we looked at other models elsewhere. The same way, I'm sure, the legislature, past legislatures, when they first created, you know, this escheatment of any unclaimed or outstanding monies, and then all of a sudden, of course, it suits us for that we want to use model legislation. It doesn't suit us, you know, now. The same thing as this came from other states as well, and now, of course, and that's basically the average for all states. So I do object to the amendment, that first amendment.
There has been an objection registered. Any other senator wish to be heard on the Pangolinian amendment to allow 9 + 1 or 10 years within which to collect? Any senator wish to be heard on the Pangolinian amendment? If not, Senator Pangolinian, you wish to close, or can I just call the question? Go ahead.
Once again, I apologize to the speaker. As you know, that this bill, and so I understand and I agree with her that what she is saying is that it will be 4 years instead of 3. But again, Mr. Speaker, to me, it's the issue of fairness. I mean, why should this government be able to come after me for 10 years for taxes I owe it, and then it can keep my money when it doesn't contact me? It makes no effort at all. There's no publication requirement of this. Mr. Speaker, you'd be surprised at who is on this list. And I sent over the weekend when I was looking at this 2008 and 2009 check register. I mean, I just contact these people, and the first thing is, how can I contact who do I contact to make this claim? Because I never knew this was the case. I never knew the government returned a check. I had moved off island. Mr. Speaker, as a matter of fact, I have one individual we've attempted to assist, and he finds himself that he was owed a check for 2000 and I think it was like 2001 or 2003. He went to Revenue Tax, went to Department of Administration, gave them a forwarding address. He had moved to the States, and he's owed a refund. He knew how much. Department of Administration, Revenue Tax knew how much. He contacted them. They kept giving him the runaround. Finally, they recognized, oh, you're right, we do have a check for you, but you know what? It was returned. And so he says, so cut me a new one. And they go, no, we can't cut you a new one because the law says after 3 years we get to keep it. So I'm sorry, you're 2 years too late. And he came back and work for this government again. And so he went to Department of Administration, and they were told, nope, you can't give him back his money because it's past the 4th year. The 1 year, past the 3 years, our current statute is 3. And so you can't, but he goes, you know that you owe me, you recognize it, and everything else, why won't you cut me a check? And they're saying, because the law says I can keep your money after 3 years. And it's just not fair. We should be able to pay these people back if they have the proper records, and it's this government that doesn't reach out. The gentleman came on island, visited Revenue Tax, visited DOA, told them where he was living, once and twice, gave him his address, and nothing. They just held the check, put it away in a drawer, and it's still dated, destroyed the check after being still dated, and put it on the registry as this money is money that we owe this person, but after 3 years, it's money we get to keep. And to this day, he doesn't have his refund, and there's no reason why. The only reason why is the failure of this government to give him back his money. And so we're saying it's just too bad and thumb our noses at these people. $8 million, $13 million that we owe, we're going to sit on our hands and not contact these people? If I didn't push this government and this governor, we would never have published a list of unclaimed checks. We would have sat on it, waited for 3 years, and said, hallelujah, manna from the sky, we have an additional $13 million to spend. But it's not our money, it's the people's money, and we made no effort to contact them. I think we should make every effort to do so. Ang intadidibi taw-tawta. May la ta spia impenyo ta tanoi na salapi niya. Munga na ta fatkiludzi ha. Sa enigi pago na sistema gaigi. Angin i gobyerno dumidibiyaw, mafatkiludyaw esta kimalofa ni tempo ni sinya un claim sa lapi mo. Da como siga un sangoni na mongi itsekku ni tinaizo. Siga masangano, ekwa taigui nanga, está aquí osuno, está aquí desganado, ya un sotaha, pues malofan y 3 años, kahuli gobyerno ya lang bula bitsakutalo. Lopti sa lapi mo na sa lapi tauto. Pues an edzuno promibebentihit para tanaw tati tauto ni sa lapi niya, ilay nila niya, sinya uki, pido mo refund and tunayo yalong 3 años. And enowa, muna tisinya na tanaw tauto, pues tatulay kay lay. Tatulay kay lay, that tanaw tempo tay mano, tanaw gusti na gobyerno timpon niya, na gobernamento, na ang ginhago dumidibi, i gobyerno mentota 10 años na tempo sinya umataka tati za umarkoy torion di dibisa galum 10 años lo ang ginid gobyerno de medibel kadada kanay mo sa 3 años sa sinya tati un hago za edwa za como tiun hago tati 4 años. At tutuni gobyerno no dumandan sa kamanta sa bula talo bitsan niya. Posito ko gagawin ni na amendment na pareho itaw-taw ni gobyerno. Ang ginsinya gobyerno ananga 10 años na tempo sa sinya ataka takti de edzgi na potsuli iundi dibigwi debilokwi di hago sinyon taka tati 10 años na tempo. Don spia za ang gindinidibiyaw ni gobyerno gyalom na 10 años sinyaun maapasi. Again, Mr. Speaker, is to level the playing field between the government and its people. That when the government can have 10 years to collect what you owe it, you should have 10 years to collect what the government owes you, not 3 or 4. And so I ask my colleagues, please, on behalf of our people, and we're seeing that it's happening. I look at that list, Mr. Speaker, of unclaimed checks, and over the weekend I sent maybe 10 emails, and every one of them said, I have not had any notification from the government of Guam that I was owed this check, that it was unclaimed, and we must not sit on our hands. We must do our obligation to our people and do all that we can to reach out to them and give them the money that we owe them. And preserve their right to claim that money with the same number of years that the government has a right to claim money that we owe them. And that is 10 years. And so I ask my colleagues, please consider that. Please think about our people and how inefficient sometimes this government is, and let's not punish our people and take their money because of our inefficiencies. Thank you, and Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Speaker Ben. There's been an objection to the Pangolinian amendment. All those in favor of the Pangolinian amendment, please raise your hand. Motion fails. Speaker Pangolinian.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the next amendment I have is basically a budgetary process that would just make it easier for this legislative body to meet the needs of the GovGuam Retirement Fund and its employees. Again, Mr. Speaker, part of the money that is cheats to the government of Guam is every year the legislature appropriates money to pay for the cost of living allowance, the annual cost of living allowance, to the retirement fund. So we do a transfer of money with a list of names of people who are owed the annual cost of living allowance. This is funded out of the general fund. And we transmit that money plus that list to the GovGuam Retirement Fund. The GovGuam Retirement Fund then, Mr. Speaker, cuts those checks to those retirees. And once again, we find that for whatever reason, these checks get returned or uncashed, and they get on the escheatment roll, Mr. Speaker. And so what happens, of course, is after 3 years, it just cheats back to the government of Guam. And the bill would allow the government, the retirement fund, to keep those unclaimed, uncashed checks that are sent to the retirees within the government, with the retirement fund. And during the course of the fiscal year, when retirees come in and enroll in the Medicare reimbursement program that we have, which we also do a separate appropriation to the retirement fund, that rather than having that money returned to the Treasury, that money retains with the retirement fund, so that when what we anticipate during the formulation of the budget as being the amount required to pay the Medicare reimbursement, when that number is lower than the actual enrollment during the fiscal year, that money then can be used to make up the difference between what was appropriated with the assumption of, for example, 108 people versus 112, because 12 people enrolled in the year versus 8. And so it's really just a function of, rather than coming back in through the course of the fiscal year, pass a new bill and said, here's an additional money in the appropriation for the Medicare reimbursement for 4 more people, that they use the money that would have escheated back to the government of Guam, and then in return, just by another appropriation, send it back to the retirement fund, and that they would then use that money. So it really is just a process of trying to eliminate the need for this legislative body to step in during the course of the fiscal year, when the number of enrollees in the Medicare reimbursement program is greater than what was anticipated and budgeted for at the beginning of the year. And rather than having to introduce a new bill in the middle of the fiscal year, that money would be used to make up that difference. So it really is just like, again, trying to simplify that process of ensuring that the Medicare reimbursement that is due now, that individual number 109, 110, 111, and 112, rather than waiting for a bill to be passed so that they can get their reimbursement, they can get their reimbursement right away, because they can use this money that would have escheated to the government of Guam to remain with the retirement fund, and allow the retirement fund to use that for those additional people that enrolled over and above what was budgeted for, because there's just greater numbers that decided to come in on that fiscal year. So once again, I'm just finding a way in this process to keep people from having to wait for the reimbursement of their Medicare supplement program, rather than having to wait for a bill to be introduced. Once we know there's a shortfall, we wait for a bill to be introduced. They have to wait 4, 5, 6 months. It may not mean anything to us, in here, but for a retiree on a fixed income, a reimbursement of $100 an extra 100 or 200 a month, whatever the cost of the Medicare program for him, having to wait 2 months or 4 months to be reimbursed, the 100 or 200 a month, it's a lot of money for people on fixed income. It's a lot of money for people who have regular needs for medications and so forth. So how do we keep people from waiting? We just allow this extra money rather than coming back to the government of Guam, having us introduce a bill to do that, to send it back, allow them to do it, reimburse it right away, and we don't keep our retirees waiting. And again, all I'm looking for, I'm not trying to play any tricks. I'm not trying to do any, I'm just trying to figure out a way, Mr. Speaker, to help our retirees rather than having them wait.
On the Pangolinian amendment, who wishes to be heard? No objection?
Mr. Speaker, the next amendment that I'm offering is to add an E to the bill. And right now, Mr. Speaker, the list of unclaimed checks are required to be just placed on a check register, basically, at the Department of Administration, and nobody does anything with it. We don't have a regular system of trying to contact these people. Mr. Speaker, when I looked at that list, Mr. Speaker, I mean, we get people like, I know it's not a privacy issue, but I just hesitate mentioning their name. But I mean, I see Tun Jose and Tan Maria on that list, and they are owed $1,000, $2,000. And we're going to keep that money now. We're just going to keep it as this government manambinto. I don't understand the greed in this here to keep the people's money and not do anything about it. He said, we put it there, we hide it, we make sure every time somebody asks about it, we say, shh, don't say anything, because they might want their money we owe them. Let's wait 3 years so we can keep it. I just can't understand the mentality that says we have a right to that. So, Mr. Speaker, how do we get the information out? How do we let these people know? And the way to do that is to require that these lists be made public. Just like we are publishing the income tax refund because we have so many. I just know that if we didn't bug the governor and DOA and RevTax, that we would have sat on that list and not said anything and hope and pray that 3 years passes so we could get to keep it. But because we didn't, because I wasn't satisfied with that, because I don't think we have a right to keep the people's money, I continued to bug him until the governor then announced that he's going to publish the list. And yeah, people are coming in every single day, making inquiries, and in some cases getting their past due money. But those people that we took their money 4 years ago, it's just unfair. I just can't do it. I just can't stand it. So I say that we have an obligation to these individuals and that we require that it be published, that we owe you money, come and get it. This government doesn't want to keep your money. It wants you to have it. It's yours. And that it be audited. And so the amendment that I'm proposing would be the Department of Administration then shall prepare a list of all the unclaimed and unpaid checks and print said list on the first Monday of October of each fiscal year in a publication of general circulation and publish an updated list on its website on a continuous basis. The list shall show the following information relative to unclaimed and unpaid checks: the payee, the description of the payment, and the total amount of the check. Mr. Speaker, we're publishing a list when the people owe us real estate tax. You saw that. The government says, hey, I want my money. This is how much you owe me, and I'm going to tell the whole world that you owe me that money. Well, I think if we owe the people money and we haven't gotten it to them, I think we should do the same. I think we should say, I should say, which shall include an apology for keeping it. I think we should apologize to the people who were keeping their money and say, look, we're sorry. We may have made attempts. For whatever reason, you did not get your check that this government owes you. We tried. We are now once again informing you and everyone that you know that, hey, Tan Maria has a check with this government. It owes her and it wants to pay her. And this is how much, and this is who you need to contact to get your payment, Tan Maria. Or this is who Tan Maria should contact so that we can work with her. Tell her to call us. And I just think it's fair. I just think we have an obligation to do that. We always say we have an obligation to collect taxes. Well, I also think we have an obligation to pay our bills. And when we have trouble reaching the individuals, then we should increase our efforts and not decrease it. Munga napatafat kiluji tauto. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask that this amendment be given favorable condition by my colleagues. Again, just in the issue of public service and what we owe our people. Thank you, and Sidusmas.
On this amendment by Speaker Pangolinian, any senator wish to be heard? Speaker Wampat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think, you and many others know that I try to be as fair as possible, and I believe that fair is fair. And only when Bill number 95 and 100 was introduced, and I'm happy that it had happened, that there were some cause and effects that took place from that, was that a week after this bill was introduced, of course, and I say fair is fair, and I have to give credit, yes, to this administration, because a week after that, he did publish a list 3 weeks in a row, breaking it down in alphabetical order to let people know. And as a result of that, yes, claims were put in, and about $1 million of that has been, paid out. And 4 years ago, which was what, 2006, 2002, 98, 94, 90, none of those, maybe no list were provided. And that's why when I say fair is fair, because I have to give credit that a list was made. And I'm glad, and I do support this amendment, because I think you're right. It is the government's obligation to make sure we do this, that we do advertise, publicize who are owed some money. But I just, and I can't answer for the actions of when this law first came into effect. And if by chance, and I know I was here on the island of Guam from the 90s on to the present, and I don't recall, of course, a list, but one such list did come up, and monies was paid. So I do support the amendment.
Any other senator wish to be heard on the amendment? Any objection to the amendment? Seeing none. Speaker Pangolinian.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, of course, I want to thank my good colleagues for listening to the argument, but I also want to express my disappointment that, we think that we have a right to the people's income tax refunds after 4 years, and that it doesn't matter, we're going to keep it. I just can't understand. I don't know why we think we have that right, yet we can go after people for up to 10 years. But I do want to thank the body's favorable consideration on the other two amendments I had. But the bigger obligations, because this is what really is cheats we're finding. And so I guess we're just blinded by the need for money, and we're going to do it because we have what we want. And to me, it's just not fair, and I'm disappointed in that. We will treat our people unfairly and give our people less rights than this government has when it comes to collecting money that it's owed, that the government should have a right to collect everything for up to 10 years, and the people can only collect for things up to 3. I just can't understand what would cause someone to think that's fair and that's a good thing. But I do want to thank the body for the favorable condition on the other amendments. And at least now we know that we're going to publish that list, and that maybe with the publication of that list, 3 years, 4 years might be okay, and that we will still be able to get the money to the people that we owe. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. On the main motion, any senator wish to be heard on 100 on the main motion? Senator Tina Munoz-Barnes.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment that will ask for portions of those cheated funds to go into separate categories within the Department of Administration, Revenue and Taxation, and the Guam Police Department. And if you can just give me 10 seconds, I know that the clerk has it, and I just want to make sure that the senators have their copy, so if you can just give me that.
We have a short recess. back in session. Senator Winnie Barnes, you're recognized.
Sijus Masi, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I may, I'd like to thank my colleagues. I know they all have a copy of it, and I know that we just passed several amendments from Speaker Ben Pangolinian. So if I can just do a technical amendment, if any of this gets through, that the legal can have be authorized to change the numbers accordingly.
All right. Any objection to legal and the clerk making the technical amendments during engrossment? They're pretty good about not making substantive. So, hearing none.
And
Proceed.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, I'll just read it as it's presented, and then hopefully that we can, however you want to divvy it up, then we'll work from there. But this amendment is at specifically states, notwithstanding any provision of law for fiscal year 2014, $2,500,000 shall be used for, and I have the breakdowns. The Department of Administration for the acquisition of software, migration, fiber connection, security, government-wide Active Directory, and upgrades for the government of Guam's computer system and network infrastructure and related purposes. Number 2 would be the Department of Revenue and Taxation for the purposes of funding the real property revaluation. The other item would be that the Guam Police, it would go for the Guam Police Department for the purchase of a completely marked police vehicles, which shall include but not be limited to the graphics, emergency lighting, sirens, police/radio communication system, and a prisoner transport system. The purchase of police vehicles shall include a vehicle warranty and maintenance program. Police vehicles must be purchased from the manufacturer's authorized dealer in Guam, and the price shall include the manufacturer's full warranty and suggested or recommended routine maintenance schedule as defined by the manufacturer's schedule maintenance guide for a minimum of 3 years or 125,000 miles, whichever comes first. The next item, Mr. Speaker, would fund funds not obligated pursuant to the sub-items listed within the 1 year following the date of enactment of this act. It shall be deposited into the income tax refund reserve, and then the Department of Administration's Department of Revenue and Taxation and the Guam Police Department shall submit a report to the Imagalahan Guahan, Legislature Guahan, on a monthly basis as to the obligation and expenditures of the funds following the enactment of this act, detailing all transactions pertaining to the funds appropriated herein. Mr. Speaker, I do know that there was much concern regarding, not concern, but there was a grant that was provided to the...
Did you, Senator Ben?
Speaker, is she presenting the amendment at this time?
Yes.
Yes, then I rise to a point of order, Mr. Speaker, and question the germaneness of this amendment.
The title of the bill is, according to the committee report, an act to add a new item E to 2116 of Chapter 21, Title 2, Title 5, Division 2, Title 5, Guam Code annotated, relative to requiring the deposit of unclaimed or unpaid tax refund checks into the Income Tax Reserve Fund. Is that the correct title? I will allow the mover to explain how she believes this amendment is germane.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as we just heard from the previous speaker who asked for the point of order, stated we just introduced amendments based on asking some provisions be put into costs for the COLA and supplemental annuity payments, and ask for payments of Medicare reimbursements pursuant to authorizations from general appropriations and supplemental appropriations. And at this time, because those were accepted, I was just asking for consideration for this amendment.
And this amendment is going to be an appropriation, is it not?
Yes, that $2.5 million be utilized for these items listed. From those funds.
And how does that go back to, again, the title and the intent? And I understand that we've accepted some additional amendments, but there was no challenge to the germaneness of those amendments at the time that they were made.
As noted, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that in my item D, the funds not obligated pursuant to the sub-items here within the 1 year following date of the enactment of this state shall be deposited back into the income tax reserve fund.
Point of order,
So-
Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to a point of order. I believe that you accepted the amendment, and so she's presiding on the amendment right now. Correct. So the issue of germaneness should have been raised prior to the chair accepting the amendment for discussion.
Mr. Speaker, I think our standing rules allow question of germaneness at any point during the discussion.
Mr. Majority Leader?
And so if the amendment is accepted, I think that it's prudent to allow her to present the amendment, and then anyone can stand up and raise their objections or raise their concerns relative to germaneness. But I think at the very least, the sponsor of the amendment should be permitted to present the amendment before us.
I think she was trying to explain how it was
Yeah.
germane to this bill, and I was
Yeah.
going to allow that to happen.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to make sure she had an opportunity to present the entire amendment without being interrupted.
I think she read both pages. No, she read double E, the Magatlahian Guahan and the Lestron Guahan. Because I was looking at the spelling when that was done. I'll take a short minute. After reviewing the rules and deliberating, it's the chair's finding that the last line of the legislative intent and findings reads, "Y legislatura further intends that such checks remain available as a funding source for future tax refunds." The proposed amendment proposes to appropriate $2.5 million to other things besides what is stated in the intent and findings. So we find that the objection to, the challenge to germaneness stands, and the chair finds that the amendment is not germane.
Mr. Speaker, based on...
Point of order. Mr. Speaker, I know that you're making your decision based on the intent. And if a motion was made to delete the intent, then of course anything that we add as amendment in the body of the bill, eventually one other amendment, standard amendment, is to make sure that the body then of the bill is reflected in the title of the bill.
We've ruled, and so if you want to challenge me,
So
you may.
then, Mr. Speaker, if I may, I'd ask to see if I can ask my colleagues if there could be a consideration here, and I don't know if I can object to your findings, but if it is proper at this time, I'd ask for consideration of my colleagues to see if I could present this motion, as I believe that the appropriated funds that I'm looking for will come from the escheated funds, and then the remainder will go back to whatever's not utilized will go back to the income tax reserve fund, which I believe is germane to the issue, and I'm just asking that a portion of that be released based on what I presented on the original amendment, my original amendment.
And I think a challenge to my ruling would be in order.
So I respectfully...
I would not be insulted.
Okay, so a respectful challenge and ask for a vote. I respectfully challenge then.
The ruling of the speaker has been challenged. Those voting to uphold the decision of the chair, please raise your right hand. No, to uphold my ruling. To uphold my ruling, isn't it? Oh, no, I'm sorry. All those in favor of overruling the chair's finding, raise your hand. The chair is overruled. No, I didn't roll. It was these 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I saw Senator Espicio, Senator Wampat, Senator Munya Barnes, Uggan, and the 5 Republicans. I thought your hand wasn't up? Then there's 8. No, to overrule the chair. All right. The chair will call the question again. All those in favor of ruling the decision of the chair, overrule my ruling. Raise your hand. 3, 9. The 6 Republicans and the 3. Oh, there's 5. Oh. 8. All right.
Mr. Speaker, I still rise to the point of order, and the standing rules of section 6.01A1 also requires that if we're now going to do an appropriation, it would be just a single appropriation per bill. The bill or the amendment has presented presents multiple appropriations to the bill, and the standing rules require that the bill be returned to the committee if they shall be reported out as having contained more than one or presented. So this amendment would be out of order, Mr. Speaker.
But Mr. Speaker, my motion was notwithstanding the House. Yes, it's in the motion.
No, your amendment does
sorry.
have notwithstanding any
Standing any
provision of the
provisions
law
of
for
law.
fiscal year 2014. If, no, that's what she's claiming, that she made, it was a notwithstanding, but it doesn't, the multiple appropriation rule is still violated.
But it's one,
One appropriation per bill unless it's a supplemental, which we only have one per year. For 3 different purposes.
I know, but I can then,
And you're going to break it by breaking it down to 1.4, 7, and 4. So then it comes out 3 again.
well, I wouldn't be given the opportunity to put it if I didn't explain what the 2.5 was for.
But I'm saying
But if we gave a blanket authorization for 2.5 without any justification, then it's important.
all right. Why don't we recess till 9 tomorrow morning?